Today, we're going to answer the question, who owns Britain? And by that, I mean, who owns the 29 million homes in the UK? What is the share of ownership between occupiers, private landlords, big corporations, and subsidized social housing providers, which includes the public sector? And then we'll discuss who should own Britain in the future. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Tariq, or Dr. T, and I've been in the property business for almost 50 years. Here's a bit about me. In the 1980s, whilst working as a junior doctor, my hobby was computers, and I co-founded one of the UK's largest PC manufacturers with over 3,000 staff and brands such as Tiny, Opus, and Time Computers. Computer manufacturing moved to China by early 2000s, and during the past 17 years, I've researched and analysed the UK property market and developed a property business for 100% passive investors that is different to traditional agents and property companies. My children and over 100 staff now run this business, but I still help out with strategy, marketing, and client advice. We've appeared on the BBC's main property show over 7 times, bought, renovated, rented out, and resold almost 3,000 low-cost houses, and we continue to look after these for our investor clients. I'm now retired from my part-time NHS work, but I really enjoy helping people with property investment and making videos like this. Before we dive in, if you find today's information useful, please hit the like button. Drop a comment below letting me know what you'd like us to cover next. And make sure you subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss future property tips. It really helps the channel and spreads the word. Let's get back to the video now. I think everyone agrees that the maximum number of people should be able to own their own homes if this is what they want. But there are many who can't afford to do this, and many who don't want to do this for one reason or another. So the rental market is essential. And the real question is, who owns these rental homes? I've pooled data from many sources, but this table is a good summary of who owns Britain right now. Over 64% of homes are owned by people who live in them, and 36% in total are rental homes owned by other than the people who live in them. Overall, 20% of the total homes are in the private rented sector, and around 15% are in subsidized social housing, which includes councils in the public sector and housing associations. At present, less than 1% are owned by big corporations. Now, within the public rented sector, which accounts for 1/5 of all homes, 94% of owners are individual small landlords owning the property or properties personally, and they account for about 85% of all private rented homes. Only 6% of owners are limited companies, most of whom are small businesses which own multiple properties, and they account for less than 16% of the private rented market. This figure of company ownership is much higher for landlords who purchased recently in the last few years. With regards to big corporations, many people are concerned about them eventually owning large sections of the rental market, over which they could have a monopoly. That will not be good for anyone, including tenants. But at the moment, they only account for less than 1% and do not own large chunks of Britain, as has been implied in some videos on this topic. And to kill another myth, I can tell you that less than 1% of UK property is owned by foreigners, according to the Land Registry. And even in London, that figure is less than 2%. So now that we know who owns Britain, the question is, who should own Britain in the future, particularly the segment that is not owner-occupied. The view of many in the Green Party is that it should all be in the public sector and social housing, with the private rented sector phased out. The current government is more moderate, but is not supporting small landlords and seems to be focused on pumping more money into the public sector to bring back council housing, and is also encouraging big corporations who are promising to solve the housing crisis by large-scale build-to-rent. Let's look at all these 3 areas: public sector, big corporations, and private landlords. Public sector ownership used to be almost double over 50 years ago, and the government plans to increase this again by pumping money into the public sector with grants and subsidized loans for them to build or buy more council houses for rental. They're also phasing out right to buy. This rule helps long-term renters of council properties buy their homes and was introduced by Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s. Labour wants to keep such houses as rental properties. But currently, the public sector is not efficient, has higher overheads, moves very slowly. Surveys have shown that in some councils, up to 30% of homes in the public sector are below the old housing standard. Increasing the public sector may reduce the pressure on social housing as there will be more homes for rent, but it could be inefficient and overall more costly than supporting the private sector to do the same thing. It may also reduce home ownership by removing the right to buy. Let's talk about big corporations such as BlackRock, Blackstone, Lloyds Bank, Legal & General, and others. They're all investing heavily in new builds for rental. It seems that the government may be encouraging big corporations to build for rent in order to help solve the housing shortage. Now, many people are worried about this because of the track record of big corporations, initially being competitive and offering value in order to take market share, and later monopolizing the housing market with higher costs for all and huge profits for them. Now, their share currently is less than 1%, and this process to monopolize the housing market may take 10 to 20 years. But if it happens, there is a real risk that rents will rise, smaller landlords will be swallowed up, and home ownership will fall. Not what any country wants. If you're getting value so far, a quick favor, hit that like button. It really helps us reach more people with this content, and share your views in the comments. Let's talk about landlords. Now, on the whole, most landlords are very efficient small businesses that provide an essential service in a cost-effective way. They provide flexibility, wider choice of properties, and immediate availability, all of which is not possible with the public sector. On average, the standard of accommodation is much better than the public sector and social housing. The private rental sector will be regulated by the new Renters' Rights Act. This will ensure that there are higher rights for tenants, better housing and energy efficiency standards, and very tough regulation of landlords. So there is a strong case for the government to actively support and increase the private rented sector instead of falling into the trap of big corporations or putting more funds into the public sector. So what do you think? Who should own Britain in the future? Please let me know what you think in the comments below. My personal view is that it does not make sense to pump more money into the public sector with grants and subsidized loans, whilst keeping taxes and stamp duty high on private landlords. After the Renters' Rights Bill becomes law, the government should actively support private landlords. They should consider reducing landlord taxes and barriers, as these will indirectly support tenants and help with UK housing. In my view, there are three priorities. More supply by encouraging building of affordable homes. Keep personal home ownership as high as possible. Provide more rental housing for social tenants. Active support of the private rented sector could help fix all three. Firstly, right now, the key thing stopping private developers building more houses to sell is the fear that they may not be able to sell them for a profit. Support of landlords will result in more new builds because developers will know that should families not buy all their houses, they will be able to sell them to investors. This will only happen if landlords are seen to be actively supported by the government. New house building will no longer be risky for developers. Right now, negative sentiment about landlords is influencing developers not to build. This will also ensure that the prime focus of low-cost house building remains to increase home ownership and not built to rent, which is preferred by the big corporations. And finally, active support of landlords can help the social housing crisis if combined with increases in the local housing allowance. This allowance is paid by the government to families on low income to help them get housing. Now, this payment towards rent is worked out on a local level and in the past was near to market rents, thereby helping tenants rent or secure accommodation in the private rented sector. Now it's well below current market rents, which have increased a lot following high general inflation in recent years. Current and previous governments have failed to increase the local housing allowance in any significant way. This is creating real stress for tenants on low income who are not able to afford the market rent. Some critics argue that increasing the local housing allowance could result in higher rents and landlords may make more profit. But if this also results in increased supply of new build houses, as discussed before, then the risk of this is less, as there will be more supply and more competition. Increasing this allowance will enable such tenants to use the efficient private rental sector, which is now heavily regulated and able to provide good quality housing for tenants who are on the waiting list for social housing. This would be better than pumping money into an inefficient public sector or risking the nation's housing by supporting build-to-rent strategy of big corporations. If that happens, Britain will no longer be a nation of homeowners. So what do you think? Is ideology making the government keep landlord taxes high whilst trying to increase public sector ownership and hence introduce inefficiencies in the housing market? What about big corporations? Will the plan to support them build new build-to-rent homes backfire over the long term? Now that the private rented sector will be heavily regulated, should the government instead increase incentives and reduce taxes on landlords so that they can help in the housing crisis and encourage building of new homes? And should the local housing allowance be increased to support low-income tenants? These are hot topics. Please drop your thoughts in the comments below. Please watch the message from our sponsor at the end. When you watch that, you will see that there is a method whereby 100% passive investors can also help the UK housing sector by buying property and then renting to a professional company that then maintains it to a good standard and sublets to its own tenants whilst complying fully with all the responsibilities and liabilities of the Renters' Rights Bill. That way, the owner is not the active landlord and can be living anywhere in the UK or abroad and has none of the landlord liabilities. They're able to provide good housing for families in the UK whilst getting long-term passive income from their investment. A win-win situation. Thanks for watching.
If you want to invest in property and get 7% net rent, long-term capital growth, no costs or liabilities ever, do nothing yourself and be living anywhere in the world, then consider Find UK Property. They provide 100% passive investment solutions for long-term income from freehold properties starting at under 80k. You get a property that is affordable, fully renovated, already rented out, contractually guaranteed and productive from day one. You become the owner and rent it back to Find UK Property so that they become your tenants and look after all aspects of the property in a fully compliant way. You never need to deal with tenants, estate agents, or do any property maintenance or repairs, or pay for any costs. Find UK Property look after over 2,500 houses, all of which are sublet to their own tenants. And on average, they get more rent from their tenants than they have to pay the property owners. So that way they can cover all the property costs. Their solutions are great for those wanting to retire on pension-type income or gradually build large property portfolios passively in a tax-efficient manner. Please visit the website at findukproperty.com and speak to a consultant today.